Spoken Labour.
I went to sleep that night without knowing that it would be the last night I ever spent in that bed at my parents' house in London. Meredith, my mum shook me awake. The room was dark, making it obvious it wasn't morning yet, or not time to get up for school anyway. Mum, I mumbled in my half-asleep state. It's time to go. Everything I told you about those stories is true. It's time for you to leave us so you can train to be a protector. Your dad and I, we've done everything we possibly can to prepare you.
First Charge is the first book in the Destiny Initiative series by Amanda Steele. The book can be purchased in paperback from Amazon. The ebook can also be purchased on Kindle, Kobo, Apple Books, and many others. Spoken Thank you today for tuning in to Spoken Label. Spoken Label was originally set up at the beginning of 2016 and as of recording has over 200 sessions in our archive. Although the podcast can be heard on Anchor, iTunes, Apple, Spotify, YouTube and literally 10 or 11 other networks, the full archive can be found at Spoken Label, all one word, spokenlabel.bandcamp.com. On Bandcamp, it is set as pay what you want, so you are entitled, if you wish, you can download it or stream it for nothing. But if you throw me a couple of pennies my way, it is always eternally grateful to help me maintain the operating costs and future running costs of this podcast. Enjoy. Spoken Label. Hi guys, Andy Eng, Spoken Label, back in the house. We're way across the seas today. I've not actually interviewed anybody in this area before, so this is brand new to me. And the poor lady I'm chatting to already, as I think my struggle with my accent tonight, so I do apologise. But she's got a fascinating story to tell, and she contacted me over matchmaker.fm, which is a podcast package where you get guests on. And the lady, Heige, and I'll let her introduce herself in a second, but this novel's intriguing, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. Heige, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody? Tell them who you are.
Yes.
And go for it.
Hi, Andy. Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me on your podcast. This is exciting. And welcome from Canada. My name is Heige Boehm, and I'm the author of a novel called Secrets in the Shadows. And it's a fictional historical novel. And I spent about 10 years writing it and researching the novel. And I went to Simon Fraser University to get a creative writing certificate. And that was a year-long program as well. And I've also been I worked on this novel with a mentor, Betty Keller, and in a writing group. And I think it's really important as a writer to belong to a good writing group. It really motivates you and makes you get your work out there because you're accountable for someone.
Yeah, so, I agree. I agree because I run my own writing workshop with my partner, and it's great because you offer feedback to people and you get feedback given you. And I think it's quite a vital process. And I know you said you've been on this book for 10 years now. So it's obviously your background. Tell people about your background, first of all, because your family are originally from Germany, aren't they? So.
Correct. So I was born in 1964 in Germany in a small town called Euskirchen. And my mom and dad were children during World War II. And they ended up being in East Germany. And in 1961, they escaped East Germany literally a day before the wall was built. And they lived in a refugee camp two refugee camps for each around 6 months or so. And then they settled in Euskirchen, and then we moved to Cologne. And I have 5 siblings, all sisters. And where we lived, there must have been an army base nearby because at nighttime they would move army tanks. And my mom, I didn't grow up with storybooks, but my mom, she always told us what happened to her during the war. And where she was from, Wohlau in Schlesien, they had to flee from the Russians coming in towards the end of the war. And so her memories were really quite graphic. And I don't ever remember not having memories of her telling me the stories. And as a kid, especially for me, I was really a visual kid. So to me, it was so alive for her. And then at night, watching army tanks going down the street, I thought it's time for war. So in my mind, war always happened at night. And, across the street from us, there was a war bunker. And as kids, we always wanted to go down and play in that bunker. And the neighbor would say, don't go play in there because a boy had died in that bunker. And I would always go, well, why aren't you getting him out? Because I didn't really understand, the finality, the death, like the finality of it. And so I would always wonder, why aren't you getting this kid out? And it was kind of disturbing, really, as a small child. I was maybe 4 or 5, but those memories are so seared in my mind. And my oldest sisters, they were already learning about the Holocaust in school. I think they started around grade 6, grade 7. They started talking about World War II. Me being a lot younger, I had no concept of that. And we had this little hiding place that they discovered behind a cupboard in our basement. And I would, they would say, come in here, and we would sit in the furniture. And there was, around the 1930s, 1940s, furniture was like a sofa and a chair. And so my oldest sisters, they would say, this is where Jews hid. And myself, I was always wondering, well, why are Jews hiding back here? And why are they living under my stairs? And how come they're not living with us upstairs? So my view of World War II was really seared at a very young age, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think because of that, it's always stuck with me. And I've always wondered, why are people allowing this to happen? Especially because, to me, war happened at night. I knew it was bad because of my mom's stories. My dad never spoke about the war. And so I was really inspired and, wondering about the people. Why aren't they stopping this? How do we stop the war? And I remember as a kid lying in bed thinking, I'm going to figure out how to stop war from happening. I think I'm still trying to figure that out.
Just a few years later, definitely, aren't you? Now,
yeah,
quite interesting, because obviously, I know, obviously, you said before, when obviously you eventually ended up moving to Vancouver, didn't you? Back in,
yes,
10 years later, was it?
1974, we moved to Vancouver.
That's what I thought it was, and that's what I thought.
Yeah, we moved straight to Vancouver, and that was interesting. We lived for the first few months at the Sylvia Hotel, and it's this beautiful hotel right on the water. And it was, and I remember, like, it was snowing, and there was the Canada geese, and we had never seen ocean and snow together. So it was really magical for us as kids, to see that. And so it was a nice introduction to Canada. But then my first days of school, I think, in 74, there wasn't a lot of people, especially in my elementary school, there weren't kids from other countries, and I didn't speak any English. I knew one word. I knew everybody, except for I pronounced it as everybody. And I walked in, and I've got my little pigtails, and I'm wearing my checkered pants and my high shoes, and like total 1970s.
Oh, God,
and the kids are just kind of looking at me, what the hell? And I walked in, and I was so excited, and I go, hello, everybody. And they all laughed at me, and I thought, well, that's a strange response. And then on the playground for, a bit, the kids started teasing us all. I was in school with 4 of my other sisters. My oldest was already in high school. And the kids started calling us names. They started calling us Hitler, Jew killer, Nazis. And it was really perplexing for me. I was in grade 3. So I was 9, almost 10. So it was the end of grade 3. And I had never really heard those words directed at me. So it really sort of started this long process of feeling responsible, and obviously I must be responsible by, kids calling me these things. And yeah, that started this journey of feeling bad about myself, getting a lot of low self-esteem. And it wasn't until much later I worked with a woman. I'm a hairdresser by trade, and the woman working beside me, she would always make fun of me being German, and so she would crack jokes and refer it back to sort of Hogan's Heroes, and I thought, wow, that's actually being quite prejudiced against me, and I started feeling myself sort of imploding. But then I started getting angry, and I started saying, you know what, that's really inappropriate. Like, you saluting me, the kind of comments you're giving me is extremely inappropriate, and it's not okay. And so it took a while for me to find that voice. And still to this day, a little while ago, I was at a function, and a woman, and I said, oh yeah, my novel got published. And she goes, oh, so now you're a Nazi. And I was like, what? So, you still get these comments, and you're not quite sure how to respond to that, the prejudice of that. But writing the novel has really helped me to understand the history and the why people maybe did what they did. And also interviewing my mom, I gained a lot of compassion for how they raised us, and it made me realize the post-traumatic stress that happens and how that's passed down. And people who are traumatized, my mom was born in 1938 and my dad was born in 1933. So a lot of their childhood was really covered in the Nazi ideology, and also, seeing bodies on the street and just being traumatized, watching what was happening. And then they're raising us. And so I have these two parents that don't even know they have post-traumatic stress,
Of course they wouldn't. Like I said, when the war started in 1939, my dad was 5 when it started. My dad can just about remember it.
Oh wow.
Well, so I say your parents, obviously, what your dad was a bit old. Well, start a couple of years younger, a couple of years older than my dad. Your mum's a little bit younger. But you're finally looking at that. It's I think the damage war does to people is very understated sometimes.
It's generational, because I think, okay, so my mom was affected this way. She still can't, if she hears loud noises, there's still a lot of things that traumatize her that she won't like she can't read my novel because it says it brings up too much for her. And my dad, I don't know his stories. He never said anything. And he at 17 joined the French Foreign Legion and fought in Korea in a tank battalion. And he had the tank was blown up. And so he's got all these scars he had all over his body. And, they're just so traumatized. And I think, wow, how did they get up every day and raise a family? They did the best they could, and not even understanding that. And it wasn't really until I wrote the book and had conversations with my mom about it that I realized that she too actually carried a lot of guilt about the war. And one of the conversations she had said, they were fleeing from the Russians and they were in the forests and hiding. And she had said, what could I have done? And I thought, wow, like you were 5 years old. You were a child, in fact, a victim of a government with an ideology that was horrendous. you had no bearing on it. And through having conversations with her, I think it's eased her and made her understand that as well.
Completely. Now, I think we need to cover a bit about your dad anyway. Obviously, I know it's a difficult topic about your dad, but you're up. The reason why this book started was back in 1983 originally, wasn't it? When unfortunately your father was killed, wasn't he, in Texas?
Yes. Yeah. My father in 1983 was murdered in Texas. And for a long time, I didn't really understand or dealt with it really. And so because I never knew him as an adult and I didn't get to hear his stories, I couldn't understand him. And so I thought, I had actually written a poem, and it was the first time I wrote something about the type of grief I had about losing my father. And that poem actually turned into a short story. And I thought, I was taking a screenwriting workshop, and I thought, this would make a great screenplay. But when I was learning how to do that, I realized I wanted to actually write a novel and have much more control around what was happening. And it was a way for me to explore what might have happened to my father. And, I created Michael, the protagonist, based on my father, the good parts of my dad, so that I could maybe understand why he was the way he was. He was a really complex man. He was quite violent, but he was also really loving as well. So, and he wasn't racist, and it was just so interesting to me. I thought, how can he be one way and then be another way? And by exploring World War II and doing the research, I got a better understanding of him, what triggered him, what might have added to his rage and his anger. That's where he let it out.
Yeah, of course, straight away. Now, obviously, in relation to your novel of Secrets of the Shadows, we know obviously it took 10 years to get to completion. Did you find then, obviously, as when you started this book, looking back at it now, is it a completely different book to what you envisioned it would be to start with? Or was the idea always there straight from the beginning?
No, actually, it pretty much was right from the get-go. I wondered where I should start to explore what my father was, who my father was. And so I thought, do I start it now as a woman going back, and should I talk that way from my point of view? And then I thought, no, it has to truly come from him, and let's go back and explore that. And so probably the half of the book I wrote within 6 months, and then I found the writing group, and then I went through edits and more research. But it pretty much was right from the get-go. For me, what happens when I get inspired, I see the story, the beginning and the middle and the end almost right away. And I don't worry about trying to fill what's in between all of it, because I think let the characters tell me their story, and listen to it. And that was really fun. And I used, I also used stories of my own childhood in there that I've put, like when the children Michael and Wolfie are playing with the Robin Hood. We used to do that as little girls. We would run around the yard, and we would take mom's sharp knives and cut the top of our underpants and pull the elastics out and then tie them around the twig. And then we'd sharpen our arrows with mom's kitchen knives. And so we'd be running around the backyard shooting at each other as our underpants were falling off, and we're trying to keep them up because we didn't have elastics in them anymore. and poor mom, she was always like, what happened to my kitchen knives?
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm always a believer of writing. You're doing novels like you're doing. The main character's got to have elements of you in it. And in your case, I can see it, what you're telling me now, in the book itself. I knew there was a lot of fact and also a lot of fiction in the book. I think you wrote a delicate line and got it dead right in the book, particularly with the two main characters. So, yeah, I agree with you completely in that. So, like I said, but no, brilliant, well done. Now, I know obviously you're looking at doing a sequel to this book, aren't you, at the moment as well? You're telling me of Mike.
Yes. Yeah, I'm about a quarter, almost halfway through the second novel, and it takes place, it's a secondary character. It's actually Paula, and she's off to go to the Ukraine as a nurse. And that was really inspired by a book that I read for research for Secrets in the Shadows, and it's Hitler's Furies.
Oh, I've heard of that book. Yeah, I have heard of that.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean, it's so fascinating. Wendy Lauer. And what I really liked about it is she sort of looked at women and how they were complicit in World War II. And I just thought, what an interesting concept to write from a young woman's perspective in a horrific place. It's the Ukraine was the open killing fields.
Yeah,
so the research
I've seen a few documentaries on that, and it's disturbing, to put it bluntly.
So yeah, it really is disturbing, and I find the research really hard, like depressing. But I just feel like it's something I have to do, and there's all these characters that are coming out from it, and they're like, we want to have this story told, and it's really horrific. So that book is a little bit slower going because I'm constantly getting overwhelmed by the horrors of the atrocities that happened there.
Oh, I can believe you with that. How long have you been writing your second book for then? Is that relatively new, is it?
I've been working on it for the last 2 years. So that kind of goes to show how slow it is.
I'm always a believer. Good writing takes time.
Yes, it does. As my mentor says, you have to let your writing compost.
Yeah. No, I agree with you completely on that. It comes naturally at its own pace. I always believe in that, definitely. So I know you obviously don't just do novels, do you? Because I know over lockdown you've been doing some paintings, haven't you, as well? Over the art side. And I'm just going to try and find your website now. I can't find what it was now. Tell us a bit about your art. I know there was a specific art project over lockdown, wasn't there?
Yeah, I love creating, and story. The written word is another way of expressing art to me. It's just another form. It's just using the written word, and I enjoy painting a lot. And I just thought, I was missing all the people around me, and I thought, oh, you know what? I'm going to paint them. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm not trained or anything. So I just have fun with it. And it's a way for me to relax. And so eventually I call it my COVID-19 isolation show.
Got it. Found it. Found it on your website. Then. It froze in a minute then for a minute. No, it's a really, I love the way you factor it. It's like, it's the art itself. You're painting, you got about the Scotsman and Karen with an eye. Yeah, they're great pictures. But they just feel like they're from the heart, and that's good. For me, that's good art to understand.
Thank you. Yeah, I love doing them, and they're like pictures of my friends and clients, and it's a really nice balance, right? From going from World War II horror to something like this, and then I also write poetry. That's really how I started my writing journey. Was I belonged to an online website writing group, and I just did poetry, and that's where I had written my father's poem, and I really enjoy doing that. What I like about poetry is I use it to try and figure out how to say something in a different way so that it isn't cliche. And what I also do is I have my characters write poetry, and that is sort of a way for me to understand them, their more deeper internal dialogue that they have with themselves through poetry. And that's a really interesting way of exploring your characters a further way.
Yeah, it's very unusual, that's for sure, because as a poet, I'm a poet really myself, and I'm used to writing for other people's eyes and poems and stuff, and the occasional short stories and stuff. It gets you, I think, a more in-depth look at the characters you're writing if you get them doing unorthodox things like that. Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah, because it's always like, I create a backstory for them. And not necessarily will I write it in the novel, but it just gives me a better understanding of who they are. And then I'm able to, their actions line up with their internal world, because I know them better.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. It's a great idea, definitely. So, well, that pretty well covers all my questions today, Heige, anyhow. So, if people want to find out more about you, where are the best coming?
They can go to my website. That's www.com Heige Boehm at .ca.
Yeah, that's
so www.heigeboehm.ca. That's my website. You can find lots of information there. And also on YouTube, you can just Google my name and there's, videos and all sorts of stuff on the web as well.
I know you've got a Facebook page as well, so I found that. Heige Boehm author as well. So
yeah, so it's all under my name. And I also have an Instagram account. So there's things that I post, more personal stuff, Yeah.
No, it's got to be done. It's got to be done in this world. It definitely has in itself.
Yes.
Okay, I know you're going to do a few pieces for us, a piece for us in the second half, aren't you? As an extract from your novel. So
yes.
What we'll do, we'll let you take a quick break, get composed, catch a breath.
Okay.
Catch a breath, as the Buddhist in me says.
Thank you.
Thank you again. It's been fascinating today. See you all in a minute. Spoken, mate. Hi, guys. Okay, straight over to my new friend, and she's going to do an extract from her novel. Over to you.
Thank you, Andy. So I'll be reading an excerpt from Secrets in the Shadows. This is a part where Michael and his best friend Wolfie, along with his classmates, are on a school trip to Berlin, and they're on the train, and Michael spots this young, beautiful girl. By the time we pulled into the next train station, we were all sitting quietly, and then I saw her. She was holding her Mutti's hand as they stood close together beneath the great flowing swastika banners that hung from the station. There was something so different about her. Her hair was a beautiful shade of chestnut brown, and her features were perfect. I became short of breath, and my hands felt clammy, no matter how much I wiped them on my shorts. She boarded the train, coming towards me, floating, as if she were walking on air, closer and closer. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She noticed me staring at her and softly bit her lip. As the train started up again, she bumped into the seat in front of her, and in so doing dropped her handkerchief. Then she floated past me as though she were in another world altogether. I leaned over to pick up her hanky. I had to talk to her. I just had to. The train rolled on metal, through rolling hills that led to quaint little villages. I lifted her hanky to my nose, the aroma of white lilies. "What have you got there, Michael?" Wolfie demanded. "Nothing? Nothing." I stood up. "I'll be back in a few minutes. We're supposed to stay in our seats. You'll get us in trouble. I'll be back in a few minutes. If her beak face asks, tell him I went to the toilets." I turned and followed the pretty girl and her Mutti into the next carriage, but most of the seats there were filled with soldiers. A Sturmbannführer glanced up at me, and as I passed, "Are you lost, boy?" "Nein, I'm looking for someone," I said as I caught a glimpse of them ahead. "Oh, there they are." I waved at them, but they didn't see me. However, I was determined to speak to the beautiful girl. The Sturmbannführer turned, looked at them, then back at me. "Friends of yours, boy?" "Nein, Herr." "Then what business do you have with them?" I was both annoyed and made nervous by his question. My face grew hot. Perhaps I had no business speaking to her. I glanced at them, took a deep breath. "I don't know. The girl dropped her hanky, and I want to return it to her." The Sturmbannführer held out his hand, motioning for me to hand it over. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the white hanky, and handed it to him. He looked added carefully, stood up, and gave it back to me. Then he clicked his heels. Heil Hitler! I saluted. Heil Hitler! But before I finished speaking, he was already headed toward the next carriage of the train. I approached the Mutti and her daughter with my heart pounding. Smiling, I held out my hand to the Mutti. Guten Tag. Startled, the Mutti cleared her throat, looked over her shoulder, then back at me. She held out her hand. Guten Tag. My name is Michael Boehm. I shook her hand, which was cold and delicate, almost skeletal. Her daughter kept her head down at first, and then shyly looked up. May I sit with you? The Mutti nodded and gestured for me to sit on the bench across from them. I'm Helen Engel, and this is my daughter Erika. Frau Engel then took her daughter's hand and held it to her breast. I nodded. I'm pleased to meet you, Frau Engel and Fräulein Erika. After we introduced ourselves, I leaned down to pull up my socks. Frau Engel nervously shuffled her feet to the side, trying to conceal her well-worn shoes, which were covered in mud. I sat up and gave her a smile. It is a very nice day, I said. Frau Engel straightened her linen coat and proceeded to comment on the weather, but I kept staring into Erika's hazel-brown eyes. Fortunately, the rhythmic clatter of the train was like a sweet-sounding lullaby that soon put Frau Engel to sleep, and Erika and I were free to talk. We laughed at one another's stories. I fell in love in that short hour. Erika, where are you and your Mutti going? We're going to stay with Uncle Franz and Tante Clara. They live in Berlin. My Tante is not well. I love Uncle, but he's old and has trouble looking after Tante Clara. He has a long grey beard and he walks with a cane. Mutti and I will help look after Tante Clara. Oh, that's good of you. Have you been to Berlin before? Nein, it's my first time. Have you? Yeah, for the Führer's 50th birthday celebration. It was quite the spectacle. Where do your relatives live? Kurfürstendamm, above the big shoe store. Then she glanced at the floor and in a hushed breath said, I don't like Herr Hitler. It was such a strange thing to say because everyone loved our Führer. But when she said nothing more, I asked, Are you hungry? She nodded. A little. I reached into my satchel and pulled out the sandwich that Mama had made for me. I gently unwrapped the clean, crisp napkin and handed her half. She took it eagerly, as if she had not eaten in days. She seemed on the verge of tears as she said, Danke. You're welcome. I dropped my satchel and leaned over to pick it up, and that's when I saw Erika put part of the sandwich into her pocket. Just then, an SS officer approached with the Sturmbannführer I had spoken to earlier. Fräulein, may I see your travel papers? He asked with what I thought was a smirk. With trembling hands, Erika handed her papers to him. He flipped through them, then stopped and said her name out loud. Erika Engel, he said as if posing a question, then looked her over from head to toe. What a nice name. Good. All is in order. He handed the paper back to her and leaned into her, smiled and whispered and said, Jew. Erika's eyes opened wide and she clasped her hand over her mouth. At that instant, Frau Engel awoke, terror spreading across her face. The Sturmbannführer reached out and pulled Erika roughly to her feet, shouting, Get up, you filthy Jew! I pulled on his arm. Take your hands off her! He hit me across the face, knocking me to the floor. Then, as he pushed Erika and her Mutti along the aisle toward the next carriage, he shouted back at me, Are you one of these rat Jews too, boy? You better shut your mouth. Some of the people in the carriage had become alarmed, and they stood up to see what was happening. But several of the soldiers in the car rose to their feet and pulled out their pistols, waving them about at the passengers. Sit down, they shouted. The Sturmbannführer looked down at me. "Get back to your feet, boy, now." Erica turned back to look at me. Her eyes were full of fear and her voice trembled. "My name is Rebecca Shapiro." I scrambled to my feet, wiping blood from my lips. Some of the passengers shook their heads at me, and some pushed at me or called out, "Shame!" Others looked down as I walked past them. When I returned to my seat, I couldn't speak. Wolfie asked, "What was all the commotion about back there?" I only shrugged. At the next small village, the train stopped, and I stared out the window in horror as Rebecca and Frau Shapiro were dragged and kicked onto the train platform. The Sturmbannführer had Rebecca by the scruff of the neck now, and 2 soldiers held onto her mutti. Wolfie and my other classmates pressed their faces to the windows to watch, and I rose to my feet, mouth open in silent protest. Then I saw Rebecca struggle free and start running away, but the Sturmbannführer pulled out his Luger and shot her. She stumbled and fell and tried to get up. He shot her again. After that, she didn't move. All this time, Rebecca's mutti was screaming and struggling to get free to run to her daughter. The Sturmbannführer nodded to the soldiers to let her go. Then he shot her dead, too. "Okay, that's enough," shouted Herr Kannengieser. "There is nothing more to see. Sit down, everyone." I sat down, not saying a word, just staring at nothing. "Oh, Michael, why did they shoot them?" Wolfie asked. I shook my head. It was my fault. I pulled out the hanky that Rebecca had dropped. In the corner of it, embroidered in pink thread, were the initials R.S. It was my fault. My fault. I plunged my hand and the hanky back into my pocket. The train started up again, and the grinding and turning of the wheels, metal on metal, lulled me into the world of untold truths. My fault. My fault. My fault. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Andy.
Wow. Great way to finish off there, definitely with that. Like,
thank you.
Everyone's what happens next. as I say, don't you? So that's a great way. I think you do what you do. If you're reading bits out of books, you leave the reader wanting more, as you've done there.
Yes.
Great. Brilliant.
Yes.
Been a pleasure today. Hang around. I need to speak to you off my friend. It's been a pleasure today, Heige. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it today.
Thank you so much, Andy. And my book, Secrets in the Shadows, you can get it off of Amazon and order it at your local bookstore. If you want to know what happens after.
Of course, yes. I know. And you, of course, they're all the Heige knows. Well, obviously, anybody else, get the book and find out. I know. Thank you again, Heige. So this is Andy N.
Thank you.
Signing out. Stay safe, everybody, and stay on. Spoken, mate.